Hello, hello. Oh, just a note that there is more decaf coffee coming. If you were wondering why we so graciously gave you mugs without anything to put in them, it is coming.
Good evening, and I heard Sarah's voice, so I know it's on. So, hey, we're glad that you're here, glad you keep coming back. How many of you, are you enjoying this book? The folks who have had a chance to get this book, have you been enjoying this book? Some books kind of capture my imagination. Some books I kind of go, I learned some things, but this book really has captured my imagination and kind of sent me back to thinking about things that kind of should be a little higher on my priority list in terms of the way that I think about life, the way I show up in life. And so I really appreciate this book. So that's all my editorial that I'm going to give you tonight. So welcome. We're so glad that you're here. And I'm going to say a little prayer, and then I'm going to introduce our host for the night, and then that person will take it away, keep it in a mystery of who this person's going to be. So, and if you're joining us at some point online, we're glad that you've joined us, and we would rather have you be here in person, but we're glad for the technology that makes it possible for you to partake. So, let's begin tonight with prayer. God, thanks. As I look out at all these faces, I'm so grateful for them all. So grateful that they would come and be a part of a conversation, practice hospitality with each other, and practice community with each other, and learn from each other, take away some things, discern and wonder. And so we invite you by the power of your Spirit to come and inspire us and encourage us and direct us and lead us, all those things that you promised to do. For we pray this in your name. Amen. Let's welcome to the podium Dr. Sarah Wilhelm Garber. I don't think I've ever done that before.
No,
that was kind of fun.
Thank you.
I'll keep this.
The most reverended Jeffrey Lindsay. What's your middle name? The most reverended. Morrison. I was like, isn't it M? Yeah. Hi. It's good to be back with you all. Now, I'm really sad to hear that you didn't end up, if you were here last week, you didn't end up doing my wonderful contribution to last week, which was we were talking through the book, as we have been, talking about the different aspects of practices that sustain us as we live into community. And Christian had been trying to come up with an activity around living truthfully. And Christian, I'm going to give you the backstory, and he's not here, so he's going to go under the bus really far. He'll be here in a minute.
I'm going to say ouch on his behalf.
Yeah, you can rescue him when he comes. So he wanted to do an exercise. And we had done some exercises together last week related to the chapters that we were looking at. And wanted to do something around truth and truth claims and kind of how do we adjudicate, wrestle with this as community, et cetera. So he's like, well, I didn't want to do anything too intense, so I was thinking of all these controversial topics we could do. And he's like, so then I thought, what about the one where like you have Aunt Frank in your house and the Nazis show up? And I go,
wait.
As a Christian, in what world do you not think that is intense?
Okay, I'm driving the bus now. So.
And so I rescued him as any Swiftie adjacent fan. I'm not a Swiftie, I am adjacent. My spouse has been threatening to call me a Swiftie. He is a Swiftie. I am Swiftie adjacent. I said, well, what if you had us work on developing skills by wrestling with the truth claim that Taylor Swift is the most important musician who has ever lived? Now, spoiler alert, I actually don't think I think people will argue that, but in a way that it could help us to surface questions. I heard, Steve, you pushed back and said, that's not a truth claim, so I respect you. Respect former moderators. But just to really surface, how do we wrestle with these things? And I thought in this group, it wouldn't have made any of us like really get too up in arms with each other, but also help us to have that conversation about how do we wrestle with being able to adjudicate and decide opinions and perspectives and differences. How do we do that and develop skills for more curiosity in doing that? So I heard you missed that activity. Stay tuned to another. Oh, hi, Christian. I didn't throw you under the bus. You're totally fine. Really glad you're here. I was telling the story about how we came to Taylor Swift as the example. So anyway, welcome back. Yeah. Welcome back. Glad to be with you all. So tonight we're going to wrap up this book. And whether you've been here or not, I'm just going to do a quick tracing of a little bit as a reminder of where we've been. So in Christine Pohl's book, she narrates 4 different practices that she thinks are really important in sustaining community. And so the first night that we were together, we talked about gratitude as a way of life. And I also did a more broad intro into the way that she structures the book. And then last week, you took on the 2 very chill chapters of making and keeping promises and living truthfully. As Christian noted last week, yeah, thanks, Jeff. Jeff laughed, so that was good. Someone did. And then tonight we'll be taking on her final one, which is practicing hospitality. And by now I think you've realized, or if you're just joining us, that for her, this is what would be known in the discipline of ethics as a virtue ethics book. It's talking about particular practices or modalities or ways of being that help to sustain. It's a particular way. She's arguing that, hey, by cultivating these things, it can help us to really do this work. Hospitality for her, even though it's the last chapter, as Christian named last time, and she names in the book, she's written another book on this. This is actually, interestingly, then her smallest chapter. And I don't know for any of you who did read it, but I found myself, having not read her other book, of being like, well, you're like telling me it's your most important thing, and I want to hear more of what this means for you. So she does give us an intro to that and what this looks like for her. And as she does in the other chapters, she lays some groundwork for that. So I'm going to do just a little bit of bringing us into the text because I am not presuming that everyone has read it. And so I'm going to just surface. There's no tests or quizzes, no pop quizzes. No one's being graded. So, Christian is going to, if you find that you are a person who cannot engage in a learning process without pop quizzes, see Christian, and he will be happy to give you a pop quiz. And so,
Train for a curve.
Yes. And forgive us. I think they put sugar in the hot dish tonight. So I'm going to set up a little bit of what's going on in this chapter. And then, as Christian said, I'm going to actually share a little bit of my own perspective on some of my own theoethical grounding for community. And then I'm going to turn it back over to all of you for us to each individually do some reflection and then have some more conversations with one another. If any of you notice your breath got a little more shallow when I said that, again, there are no right answers. You do not have to be able to quote verse and chapter from the Bible perfectly about whatever your theology is. This is about just getting curious and noticing what's operative for all of us, right? Because sometimes you realize in community, you bump into stuff because you actually even have different values or different things that are undergirding your sense of what you thought you were doing as community. So we'll spend some time with that, and that will be our night for tonight, okay? So, the last section, which starts with chapter 11, I am on page 159 if you want to do one of those skim throughs. Helpful 101 for folks. If you ever do have a thing that you want to go to, and you might already have this skill, but one of the things that you learn in graduate education, right, is actually to read all of the headings on the thing, and then you know where the author is going, right? And then you can read it as thoroughly or not if you want. So what she does in this chapter, as she's done in the prior ones as well, is she begins to really lay the groundwork for how is this grounded for us biblically? How does the vision of hospitality show up throughout Scripture? And how does this animate our own sense that hospitality is a central aspect of what it means to be a Christian community? For us to be a Christian community, to ground ourselves in this tradition. So she does that. She takes a look back throughout Scriptures, going back to Genesis and placing us in that spot to say, what does it mean that we are to be a people who entertain and welcome strangers and angels, as we heard in Jeff's sermon on El Roy. The same folks who extend welcome at times do not extend welcome. And we see this throughout the Scriptures, particularly in the Hebrew Bible Old Testament. The Israelites are continually getting it sideways with God whenever they forget that a fundamental call of what it means to be Israel is to be a people who are welcome. For you yourselves, the scriptures will say, have known what it was to be a stranger in the land. So don't forget. So that's an animating force. She then traces that with how we see that both in its beauty and in its failure in the New Testament church, and how the church was called, and then throughout history, wrestled with this self-understanding of needing to be a people who welcome the strangers. As she does in the other sections as well, then she outlines some of the ways that this Christian value of hospitality and this virtue is actually out of step with much of the way that contemporary culture, and including within the church as well, that this can be something we at times have forgotten is a central call of ours. And then she names some of the ways that this can get sideways for us in the midst of the complexity of our own lives. And if you read it, you may have thought of some of your own examples of the ways you've seen hospitality go sideways, where maybe not everyone was actually included, or you invited someone over and they, or into your life, and they actually violated that welcome that you had extended to them. And so she names some of the ways that can happen and it can go sideways. And then she also animates for us some ways that we actually can more deeply live into the practice of hospitality. And I'm now on 170, again, if you want to trace along, but the ways we can share our gifts as people, not just be gathering at a church, but building, but what does it mean to invite one another into each other's homes? Being able to tell honest stories about both the beauty and the complexity of hospitality in our own lives, in our relationships, in our churches, and in the world. And also being able, like, how do we end well? Like, how do we say goodbye well? These sorts of things, she names that. And so she outlines that basically and says fundamentally, this is the call to the church, is to be a people who practice hospitality. And some of you may recall that Welcome Beloved is a core value of this church, right? And so I think one of the things I wanted to, before I share some of my own sense of what grounds me and then turn it to us, is I wanted us to actually have some conversation with one another around the table around one of two things. And you can pick wherever you want to go with this for yourself and then at the table. And you could also always say, I'm here to listen tonight. The one is, have you experienced or witnessed yourself, do you have any practices of hospitality? So, and have you witnessed or experienced anything that was like a profound experience of hospitality that really impacted you, or any of your own practices? The second option would actually be to take it more to this community. One of our values is Welcome Beloved. How have you seen that play out? And or any thoughts about how you'd like to see us deepen into that in view of what does it mean to be people of hospitality? So that's where I would say. So either, again, any experiences you've had, and or if you want to connect it directly to the church. So I'm going to ask you to share with one another at your tables. And we'll take about 10 minutes to do this and kind of just see what pops up and in our conversation with one another, okay? Any questions? All right. I saw one thumbs up, so we're good. Oh, I have been asked to restate the question. The number one is experience of hospitality or practice that you have, or number two, take it to this church, core value of Welcome Beloved. Any ways you've seen it or ways you'd love to see us deepen into that in view of hospitality. Okay, take another minute at your table. We'll come back together as a larger group. So as you're wrapping up, I'm just going to note that on the back table tonight that we have Christian's book, Jesus, Jubilee, and the Politics of God's Reign, which that is fanfare not only for the book itself, but I think also just as a reminder that Sundays at 11 a.m. after the services in person and then also online and on our YouTube page, you can watch the class, which is about this book. Great forward to the book is also included in there, which I wrote. I know. I'm like trying to be so nice to Christian. Oh. You might appreciate though, 2 weeks ago after this, and I had thrown Christian on the bus twice in 1 week. And I sent him a note and I said, I just want to check with you. You know I'm kidding and I really love and respect and appreciate. And does it come across that way? So in case anyone is wondering, deep love and affection. And I said, you're like the big brother I never had. So then the next thing that I want to highlight is that what's happening, so tonight is the last night for this book. Then next week, we are gathering for a whole community service project. And service and learning around our mission partners. And so everyone will be gathering for dinner. We'll be then doing a collective work together as a community. And then we're going to actually we're going to hear from two of our ministry partners, including Jamie. You will be here and sharing some more about the work that you and all those who work with you do. And then one of our other ministry partners. So it's like kind of a 3-part food, doing some stuff together, and then being able to continue to learn together. So that will be next week. And then the week following that is Ash Wednesday, which is the kickoff for Lent. And so I just wanted to also give a plug for, were you there? This is Lenten Reflections on the Spiritual. So as we journey into Lent, if you're a person who likes to have a devotional reading and to do that along with others in community, we're going to be utilizing this text, which follows along with African American spirituals. And part of how Christian selected this is because our Lenten theme is crying out, is what it's called, crying out. And we're bringing together the Psalms in conversation with the Gospels, and just that journey and that longing, that very human longing we all have, needing and crying out for God to show up in our lives and in the world. And so we will be connecting, and it's also Black History Month in February. We will be connecting some of these African American spirituals in worship and then through our Lenten devotional. So you can buy a copy of this if you would like. And then the 21st of February is when we will start our next series on Wednesday nights. And that is going to be a 4-part following the book, Why the Mystics Matter Now. So that will be a 4-part series that we'll be doing on this. The author, and you'll hear more about this in e-news, et cetera, the author will be joining us on Zoom, right? On Zoom for our 3rd session, which however dates and calendars work, it's March 6th. Thank you. I figured, I was hoping for that. I don't know if anyone was in the traditional service during the benediction. I was really hoping they would put up the slide for Christian's class, because I was like needing someone to like hit for me, like allow me the softball. There was no slide, so I called the Christian's class Jesus and Justice or Jubilee or something, and people still came. So back to our book that we're on right now. So living into community. I want to actually just spend, if you have, it looks like you have a mic. I'm not going to go table to table for sure tonight, but I just want to hear, were there any things, if anyone does want to share, that popped up of either an experience that you've had of hospitality, a commitment of your own, and or if there was anything that popped up thinking about our core value that you want to make sure gets vocalized in the space with everyone to hear, like it really hits you and you want to make sure that gets vocalized. Would really love to hear from Kathy. Welcome. Welcome to being voluntold to be able to share. So thank you for being willing to do so. This is Kathy.
I was voluntold to share by Jeff. What I shared at the table was kind of how I ended up living in Minnesota. I've moved here recently, but closer? Hey, there you go. Now you can hear me for sure. So my daughter went to St. Olaf, and when she graduated, she wanted to try and get a job in Minnesota. And her best friend in college, she had been trying to go do study abroad, and she got accepted in the study abroad, and then for the summer she had some jobs, something like that. But so for 6 months, best friend was going to be gone, and so my daughter was going to look for a job, and this Jane, the best friend's parents, Bill and Sue, said, hey, if your daughter wants to look for a job and stay in Minnesota rather than try and find an apartment, she can just come and be Jane and live in our house. For 6 months, my daughter was able to go live in their house, look for a job. She got a job, but they didn't just like have her stay, which was so incredibly nice, but they also kind of really made her a part of the family. My daughter would like talk to me about all these things she'd learned how to cook that she didn't learn from me. And the can-do Bill dad, had her in the yard, and she learned how to do some yard stuff. She was changing filters on her car. Lots of things. Like they made her a daughter in that family. So, it worked out great. And then my daughter did get a job, and they're like, hey, now you've got a job, you can contribute to the household. We'd like you to pay $100 a month. I thought that was fantastic. So they didn't let her get away with anything, and she wouldn't have anyhow. She's not that way. But they really didn't just open their door. They truly made her a part of the family. So little piece more. So my daughter Jane graduates from college. My daughter's got a job. Their other friend Cassie's got a job, and the three girls get an apartment together in Minneapolis, just off of Xerxes. And the third girl, Cassie, she's an RN. So now you know where this story's going to go. COVID. And so Jane and my daughter can work from home, and Cassie's an RN at the hospital that's really right here by Southdale, whatever. There, that's where she's working. And new nurse, her job was COVID people come in the door, go this way. You're in for an x-ray, you go that way. So she was going to be exposed, no doubt. Jane's parents say, hey, why don't you and Jane, Jane and my daughter, Caitlin, come live back with us. We're all working from home, and you'll be safe. And they were up there. You know how long COVID was. They're living up there again, and so the girls are still able to pay their rent. So Cassie has a place to herself while she's, in this situation. She doesn't have to shower off and sanitize the whole house. They just did that again, and they just did it. They didn't make a big deal about it. They just did it. So when this topic came up, I was like, oh boy, do I know hospitality. Yeah. It really worked, and that's how she ends up living here.
Thank you.
There's my short story.
Thank you for sharing.
My question is, did they call her Jane while she lived in the house? Because that might explain a few things.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we'll come over to Kelsey.
Sure. I was just sharing with my table that my ancestry, as far back as can be traced, is Mennonite, and hospitality in this way is part and parcel of who the Mennonites are. And so, I couldn't even recall all of the stories that I would have of this just being part of life, having people coming and going. Christian was sharing this beautiful history of the guest room, that the guest room came about because it was supposed to be a place that was always available to somebody passing through, and that's very much how everyone in my family operated. Meals were shared. Some people became long-term, were around long-term, and some people were just passing through for the day or the night, and so that just feels so very natural to me. This other way of being, this very isolated, siloed way of being, feels very uncomfortable and antithetical to my very cells, I feel like. So
Thank you.
I'm grateful for that.
Thanks for sharing that.
We had a guest room in our house. It was the kids in the sleeping bag in the basement. So.
Yeah, so, we all, I think, probably have some stories of ways in which we've experienced profound welcome Sometimes things get labeled as being, oh, they're being hospitable. And then there's these moments of like just profound welcome, which I think she's trying to get us into, is like that profound welcome. And then sometimes Michelle and I were talking, sometimes there can be these sorts of like, well, I don't have the gift of hospitality, so it's like not in a sense of like, oh, your house needs to look perfect or you need to be able to bake all the things, but what does it mean to truly be a people who, as she starts the book with gratitude and grace, as we ourselves have been fully welcomed by God, what does it mean to be a people who extend that kind of radical welcome in all its different ways to people? Yeah.
Sarah, I really appreciate that you making that distinction. My mother used to say that she thought she had the gift of hospitality. She really didn't, because it exacted a pound of flesh, but she was very hospitable. If you came into her house, you felt welcome and you were cared for and stuff, but it didn't flow out of a natural sense of, just come and be a part of it. So I think that distinction between that gift of hospitality and our call for all of us to be hospitable. Which, so
and
appreciate
extend radical welcome. And even with that, like recognizing often how gendered, like that, like who has the gift of hospitality? Well, we all know who's supposed to, and I in my 20s and 30s, wanting to be a person of profound welcome, right? Like wanting to be that way, wanting to be hospitable to people. And then I would think like, oh, it means I need to do this, and this. And so I finally was like, sweetie, just buy the baked salad. Like, just mix the salad. You don't have time to, like, it's okay. You can still be welcoming the person, because they're probably going to experience more welcome from you if you're not like so, like, oh gosh, I have to perform femininity correctly in order to be the right kind of hospitable person. If I didn't, and then you're like, oh, sweetie, take a breath. How is God welcome me? Was God like, make sure everything is cleaned up in your life and then you're welcome here? So that's, I think, also a part of her book is, I think, can invite us deeper into our own experiences of these things from God and in our own being, so that way we can be people who can extend gratitude because we've known grace. We extend hospitality because we've known welcome, these sorts of things. So I think she's inviting us to keep reflecting on that. And I think as a community, as we continue envisioning, wrestling with this core value, which is also a core value, of welcome beloved, and what are practices and ways of being that can help us to keep cultivating and deepening that capacity to be a people of welcome. So that is the final place where she ends the text, as being a people of welcome. Just one note I will say additionally about this this book and a thing in general about each of the chapters from my own noticing as a reader, is all of these are multivocal and multi-directional practices. So even thinking about hospitality. So in this chapter, I would say she very much made it the hospitality about how do we welcome and create welcome for people in our homes and as a church. And she talks about the scripture passages that make it really clear that the Israelites are supposed to welcome the stranger. But she doesn't translate that to, as a community, we need to have practices of hospitality that also take us further out into the world. So what does it mean to be people who, whether working on issues of housing and homelessness, issues of migration and immigration, like how does our faith animate us in a way that as a community is augmenting our ability to develop and cultivate these practices? So you hear that, like when a church gets myopic and it's like, oh, community is just who came in the doors. Well, why are they going to come in the doors? So how do we keep extending what hospitality means? And then knowing we'll experience it more deeply between ourselves as we do those things. So with any of these practices, I think just deeply affirming that truthfulness matters in many directions. Can I tell the truth about myself? Can I tell the truth about Christianity and its history? Can I tell the truth about my own community? Can I tell, so it's not just one direction, but it's an inner between us and God, us and one another, and how we embody that in the world. So these are really holistic practices that I think at our best can help to sustain us. Were you going to comment?
I was just going to make one other comment. I was a little bit surprised, and to your point, I haven't read her other book, where she actually talks more about hospitality. But one of the things we were talking at our table, one of the things I thought was interesting is that she didn't really talk much about risk. Because I think one of the hurdles for hospitality is risk. You think of the first century practices in several stories where, it was late at night and they were going to go on the journey, and they said, no, it's getting late, stay with us. And a lot of times we don't do that because we're afraid of risks. We're afraid that something might happen, somebody might take something, it won't go well. There might be someone would turn down our ability to welcome or something. And so that risk, I think, is one of those things that keeps people from thinking about being hospitable. If we held on to some of that a little looser, I think it might open us up to be that more welcoming. Alice was talking about, how when somebody comes new into the community, sometimes we go ahead. Why are they here? Well, maybe they don't fit so well, or maybe they have an ulterior motive, and instead of going, oh, that's all possible, but I'm not going to start there. I'm going to start with, welcome. We're glad that you're here, and then we're not surprised if something else happens because it does, but we don't start there. I just thought that was interesting that she didn't identify more about that because I think that's one of the big hurdles. But.
No, I appreciate it. And so I'm going to actually use that as a segue to talk a little bit about my own. And this is going to be, I did not write, I was going to write a paper about this, and there's some sort of thing, and then I didn't. So I'm going to share with you, because I'll tell you, it's from a pedagogical position I decided to make that choice. That's not why. But actually, I think it'll work out, because I'm going to just on the fly share with you a couple things that I'm pretty aware of that shape my own sense of community. So I think for me, it actually, it goes back to Genesis, which is generally a good place to start as a Christian, I think. The sense of, I think, from the beginning, I think we read that not only did God form and create humans, and that there wasn't just one human alone, it was a human in the midst of this beautiful created universe too. It wasn't just two humans, right? It was this whole thing. So I think when I think about community, I think about how fundamental it is. Like when God breathes life, community is part of it. Like we weren't meant to journey alone. This is part of God's animating work of creation. The second thing is that I think about community is that the image from Genesis of God walking with in the garden with them, and also that they were naked and not ashamed. So that's a two-part truth for me. So first, creation, community. Second, God's presence with us in the midst of the created order. And the third part of that is they were naked and not ashamed. And so for me, that's that sense of, I think the garden kind of vision, the garden vision of community being one in which, what does it mean that we're working to be real and vulnerable, to show ourselves in all of the beauty, complexity, warts, and everything of who we are, and God walks with us in the midst of that. And so then actually a lot of what I think about community from there is, I'm going to skip really far now for a moment. Well, actually, I'm going to stop in the deep call of the welcome of the stranger. Because, right, Israel is brought into freedom. They are called to be a people who then make that freedom in the world for themselves and for others. And so I think that sense of, that's a deep Christian call, is that we can't forget the grace and the love and the goodness that has been shown to us and that we have in our lives. We're called to be a people of remembrance. And that has to be an animating aspect of community and of our faith so that we can actually be Christian in the world, that we can remember God's goodness. The other aspect of community for me would be, now to jump forward, is the sense of that Jesus is trying to bring us all home and help us to live in the garden. And so that's, for me, the fundamental place of community that I think Jesus is right, and he's inviting the disciples around table fellowship. He keeps expanding the circle. And so to me, that's where fundamental, those are kind of my animating, if I'm going to go with my own biblical vision, that's what animates God creation, created whole thing. God's walking with them. They're naked and not ashamed. The call to remember how God has shown up. And then God is trying to help us all get back home and know what it's like to live in the garden. So then for me, I think fundamentally, thinking about living into community, what are the practices that sustain us? For me, that is where I take a deep turn to psychology and to practices that help us to do our own healing work. Because I actually think if we're going to be able to sustain community, we need to have practices that help us to heal. So for instance, if I was raised in a family or an environment where I wasn't safe, and I actually felt like I was under constant threat, I might be able to intellectually affirm to you, I believe in hospitality, welcome, that is absolutely true, but I'm fundamentally under constant threat assessment because of my own story, right? Which is totally reasonable and understandable. We all got our stuff. But that's where, for me, if I'm gonna say, what are the practices that sustain community? I think having resources ourselves, integrating spirituality, our faith and psychology, our faith and our stories, connecting that so that way we can do healing work to really let the gospel sink into our bones, so that hopefully we can work our way into garden life. Because if I have those inner resources, I can better do the other aspects of what will actually sustain community, okay? So that would, I guess, that's my wrap up of what I think. So that's mine. You have your own thoughts. They may be very different. They may be, I don't know, I just want people to be like good to each other. I think that's important. Cool, whatever it is. So I'm gonna ask you, it doesn't need to be hugely philosophical, kind of like one of those things where you do a writing exercise where people are like, just kind of notice what comes up. You know, so if you think of either like, why are you even part of a church? Like, why do you think community matters? These might be some inner prompts that could help you, like, what has been a beautiful experience of community you've had? What's important to you in community? What's been hurtful? Any of those things can help to surface for you what's true about what grounds you and why community, what you think sustains it, what's important to you. So that's all I'm trying to ask right now is think of your own thoughts about community. What does it mean if you were gonna say, living into community, here's my word about what's important to it. It might be, I just wanna be seen and see other people. Okay, cool. You know, whatever it is. Is that enough of a prompt to at least community? What would you say, living into community, here are either the practices or the core things that are important to me in this moment, okay? So you have sheets of paper. We'll actually spend just a little bit of time. If you wanna write it out, if you wanna just sit and think, we'll spend about 5 minutes with that, and then I'm gonna invite us to turn to one another and share a little bit of our own awareness and noticings, okay? I will just acknowledge a truth that you are hearing in the room, which is that we have all decided to approach the assignment differently, and that is fine. Okay, so some of you maybe just need to talk it out to figure it out. That's cool, okay? You already are anyway, not like you need my permission, but just want to affirm that that's also happening. So if some of you are like, but I was gonna write this down, you can still do that, and you can tell your neighbors that you want to spend a minute writing it down. So whatever you need to do, and then.
So you're saying we're welcome to do it our own way?
You are welcome to do it in your own way, and I just recognized I hadn't said that in the space, and so I wanted to honor that that was happening.
Do you guys realize we have visitors here? As a matter of fact, this visitor here was drawing me throughout the service. I can't wait to see what he's drawing. Arthur, so good. Most of the time we did. Yeah, that wasn't his thing. We loved it. Whether it was true or not, but that the Empire Show upstairs, I still stop it. But stop by.
So I'm going to ask there to be a person from your table who would just notice some of the things that you heard from one another. So be gathering someone to do that, and we'll come back together in a minute. So Jeff will take the mic around, so at each of your tables, if someone could share just some observations or noticings of what you heard from one another.
I thought it was you.
Gabe volunteered to go for Gabe's table, or maybe Kimpo was going to go.
I was only joking. She's serious.
Okay.
That's good.
A core value of community. Fake it till you make it. Maybe
Not
not,
in this case,
but
no.
not at this one. Gabriel, would you like to share?
No, but here
Thank
we go.
you.
So one thought that, one thought in terms of a practice of community that I'm gonna be able to summarize. Do you have the summary? I can share mine.
Just remember the people.
Feeling bad I put you in that. That wasn't very hospitable.
No,
of
it's
me.
okay. It's okay. You're trying to include me.
Why don't you just summarize kind of what you?
Because I don't remember.
That's too much pressure.
They were talking about I could summarize for them.
Why don't we go around?
Okay, so we talked about kind of a lot of different things, like recognizing that we're all different and we have different needs, and that shows up in like approaching people in ways that meet their needs. So introverts versus extroverts, etc. Just like different ways of bringing them in that actually is more about them than you. That was an interesting point. We talked about just really pushing ourselves to find the good in people, even when that's difficult. And if you need to fake it, that's still okay, you know? And just like being able to support the community as an important entity that we all have to be building, that's like a value in itself. And recognizing that there's some in our community right now that still don't always feel welcome, and reflecting on how our spaces, like literally physical spaces, relational spaces, might not always be meeting what people want or need, and just being curious to push ourselves.
Thank you.
Jim, can I put you on the spot? Because you raised at our table an interesting kind of an overview, summary, and you used the one word. So
The first word that really struck home with me in this book was the word commitment. And what I wrote is, it all starts with a commitment, known or unknown, to be friendly, welcoming, courteous, helpful, and promising. And even if you don't know you have a commitment to it, it might be built into your psyche. Or you might say, I'm going to move into this neighborhood and be real friendly with people. Welcome them, say hi to them, give their dog a milk bone when it walks by, which Alice will attest, I do that all the time. So I get to meet people from even outside the immediate neighborhood, and you get to be friendly with them. And I think that can play in any part of our lives, including in church.
there's a volunteer. We'll start with that. Not necessarily. No.
Well, I'm sorry I skipped.
No, you please.
No, I just wanted to piggyback on what he said, that commitment, just to, because it takes effort and energy in reaching out, and I think commitment is a core to that it isn't always easy. And Anne especially said it takes energy and effort to get people together. Determination was another one. So I just thought of that.
Awesome. Mary Scott has a story. We're coming. Okay.
You remember, I don't know how many years ago, we used to do Dine with Nine? I think that would be a great thing to have again. And I think that worked really well. And make some rules where it can't be all people you know, or, you know. Anyway, I think Dine with Nine would be a great thing to.
So you have 9 people sign up, and then you rotate houses. So you actually end up with them for 4 weeks. Not necessarily 4 weeks in a row, but it's a chance for you to be in their home. It's a chance for you to share a meal together, a chance for you to get to hear their stories. Usually the way that I've done it when we've done it is that whoever's hosting tells their story. So
Great.
people have done it different ways, but
How about?
It's real easy.
Yep.
Everybody brings something, so you don't need to think, oh my goodness, I have to fix a big dinner for everybody. You maybe have
You can bring a salad in a
a
bag.
salad, or, yeah, I loved your salad in the bag. I brought that up.
I know the last time we did, there was a group that met at
Yeah.
the church every week because they said none of us want people to come to our house, but they still had Dine with Nine at the church.
Great. Let's go to the northwest corner first, and then we'll come to our last 2 tables. I am going to make us be very orderly.
Thank you.
Yes.
Let's see who's going to speak.
If you all want.
Oh, God, no.
Was that a prayer or was that?
Dear Lord. Rachel, yes, go ahead. What popped up at your table?
Kelsey, I said the first thing that came to me was I have been struggling in my job lately. Like, it is not a very healthy place for me, and I don't feel seen, and I don't feel like my gifts are not appreciated, but I don't even think they're seen. And it has struck me in recent weeks how different it is for me here, where everyone's so happy to see me and pointing out the good things about me and wanting me around. And it's not apples to apples, because this isn't, none of you are expecting anything of me. but it's just it makes it that much more obvious that I need a different job and that I need to be in a place where I'm valued. So thank you.
I'm coming, Mary. That's your heads up.
Mary Scott?
Jeff is much more excited about it than I am. Okay.
Thank you for your solidarity and excitement, Jeffrey.
In 1986, I went to a Lutheran church, and they had a sermon saying, you need 3 hugs a day in order to be healthy. And everybody very wisely nodded in their pews and went out the church without touching each other for 1 second. And I didn't go back to church for 3 years.
Wow.
And then a friend of mine invited me to Colonial. And I heard the choir, and I asked the choir director if they needed auditions, and he said no. And I said, I'll see you in September. And I joined the choir, and I don't ever remember being new. I don't, new things and new people, I'm wary of. I don't feel comfortable. Except I don't know what happened, but I was a long-term member after a day.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks. We'll come up to our final. Yes, it's a community unto itself.
Yeah, they are.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
We'll
they
come
are.
to our final table for the night.
I always tell anyone who joins Dudes and Donuts on Thursday mornings, I always say, you don't have to wait to participate. You're with us. And I've had a couple of people come back and say, oh, that's really helpful, because you don't know, do I have to wait a couple meetings before I can share something? Or, so yeah. So practicing that opportunity. Who's speaking for you? Your table. Rick, here, I got no jokes.
I was going to say,
It was a joke, so.
I don't know what we really talked about. We talked about the dining with Nine. We talked about that. We talked about how a lot of it just comes from leadership. That if you have someone and the values that drive this church, if you're missing a value of community or hospitality, you don't have anything really to commune over. And I was thinking about how, and I can't remember if this was back home or somewhere else, but when you're driving around in the winter in some of these small towns up in Canada, so you don't freeze to death, the people in town will flip the porch lights on if they have somewhere for you to be. So you'll be driving around, if you see a porch light, you can just pull your car over and knock on the door and they'll let you in these bad storms. Well, there's not all of them, but like little towns. Like this wouldn't happen in Winnipeg, but it would happen in like a little town where there's like vast distances to the next stop. They'll just, it's better than plucking dead people off the side of the road in the morning. So they do that.
It's very pragmatic, if nothing else. Yes.
But it's like what causes people. It made me think about this story because what you mentioned that you grew up with this. It's because it's around you all the time. So you just don't even think of not turning your light on. And so if you have other people around you that are offering hospitality and community, it's probably causes you to think about being more hospitable than if you're in a community that doesn't do that.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to plan a trip to like Toronto. See if I can just like get there and everything's free. Yeah, how about somebody else? I think that's a beautiful story. I think that's just amazing to think that people do that.
Yeah, we did. Gabe talked for everybody.
All right.
Just kidding. Thank you all for sharing. And again, part of, I know there's what we talked about. There's also what you talked about your tables, and there's also what you didn't share. But just really want to encourage you that each of us have our own theology, our own ethics, our own thoughts and experiences of community, and continuing to be able to identify what those things are, to name them, and then to be curious about what can help to sustain those things are all really beautiful practices for us to continue work in. So as a way of closing and sending, I'm going to send us then with this blessing from Jan Richardson as we wrap up the study. But thank you all for being a part of it. And again, we hope to see you next week for the service project. This is from Jan Richardson. It is a welcoming blessing, so it's in conversation with our last chapter. When you are lost in your own life, when the landscape you have known falls away, when your familiar path becomes foreign and you find yourself a stranger in the story you had held most dear, let yourself be lost and let yourself find a place whose contours you do not already know, whose cadences you have not learned by heart, and let yourself land on a threshold that mirrors the mystery of your own soul. It will come as a surprise, what arrives to welcome you through the door, making a place for you at the table and calling you by your name. Let what comes come. Let the glass be filled. Let the light be tended. Let the hands lay before you that will meet you in your hunger. Let the laughter, let the sweetness that enters the sorrow. Let the solace that comes a sustenance and sudden unbidden grace. For what comes, offer gladness. For what greets you with kindly welcome, offer thanks. Offer blessing for those who gathered you in and will not be forgotten. Those who, when you were a stranger, made a place for you at the table and called you by your name. So go in the name of the God who calls each of you by your names, and may God continue to do that work in all of us. Amen.